As we get close to winding this series about idols down, we're going to look tonight at Abraham's story in Genesis 22 and examine what in our lives might be holding us back from what God wants to do, from what God wants to make of us, from being all that we can be for Him, and how we can lay those things down before Him so that we can become who He wants us to be. So let's read from Genesis 22, where He's taking Isaac to the altar. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, here I am, he answered. Take your son, he said, your only son Isaac, whom you love. Go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. So Abraham got up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took with him 2 of his young men and his son Isaac. He split wood for a burnt offering and set out to go to the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there to worship, and then we'll come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. In his hand he took the fire and the knife, and the 2 of them walked on together. Then Isaac spoke to his father Abraham and said, My father. And he replied, Here I am, my son. Isaac said, The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. Then the 2 of them walked on together. Then they arrived at the place God had told him about. Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood. He bound his son Isaac and placed him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. He replied, Here I am. Then he said, Do not lay a hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your only son from me. Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the thickets by its thorns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham named that place, The Lord will provide. So today it is said, It will be provided on the Lord's mountain. Then the angel called to Abraham a second time and said, By myself I have sworn, this is the Lord's declaration, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your only son, I will indeed bless you and make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your offspring will possess the city gates of their enemies. All the nations of the earth will be blessed by your offspring because you have obeyed my command. So this is a familiar story to those who've been raised in church and those who have spent a lot of time in the Old Testament and Genesis and so forth. But maybe we haven't ever thought of it from the perspective of this might be a story about idolatry, where Abraham might be trusting in the promise of his son and the son of the promise more so than he's actually trusting in God. And so God is testing him to see what he's really trusting in. So we have to ask ourselves, and tonight that's what we're going to do, is ask ourselves a bunch of questions. And the first category of questions comes under how firm is my faith in God? And the first question is this: do I trust God for who he is, or not just for what he can do for me? Do we trust him like a genie in the lamp where we rub him and we get whatever we want and we think he's at our bid and call and we can get whatever wishes we have and so forth? Do I just trust him when things are going good? Do I trust him for what I can get from him or for who he is? Do I believe he exists at my bid and call? Do I believe he exists for me or I exist for him to bring him glory? For Abraham, was he waiting on God or was he waiting on this son of the promise? Was he waiting on the son that God had provided? The second question, do I trust God even when his demands are difficult? It's easy to trust God when things are easy, when he tells us simple things to do, when life's easy, going the way that we want it to, and that kind of thing. But he wants to push us out of comfort. He wants to push us out of comfortable, and sometimes his demands are not easy. They're hard. They're difficult. Choosing to follow Christ is fairly easy. Doing it wholeheartedly, fully committed is not as easy. Jesus has plenty of fans, people who are cheering him on and like him and want to be a part of him, but not very many full followers, not very many real followers, not very many people willing to go all in. There's a story I ran across years ago where so many of the Declaration of Independence signers were persecuted for doing that. They lost homes, they lost family members. Many of them did not wind up living the life that they lived up to that point, but they did it because of what they believed in and because of the freedom that I'm thankful for today that they trusted in and they believed in, and they suffered for it, but they were willing to trust even at that it was what was right. The third question, do I trust God even when life gets hard? Life gets hard sometimes. Life gets difficult. It requires and brings hard things sometimes. When that happens, when life gets chaotic, when it gets out of our control, will we still trust God? Will we still follow God? If God is God, he's God when life is good. He's God when life is bad. He's God when life is hard. Do I trust him then? And the fourth question is, do I trust God even when it doesn't make sense? This couldn't have made sense to Abraham. After waiting all these years, he's an old man. He's gotten this promise, and Isaac is the fulfillment of that promise, and God's saying, sacrifice him, give him back to me, lay him on the altar, kill him. He's your sacrifice. There's going to be times when life situations and circumstances don't make sense to us from a human perspective, at least. God may ask of us things that we don't understand, that don't make sense to us. Will we give up on him because it's not what we want, because it doesn't make sense, or will we trust him anyway? So that's the first category about our foundation of our faith, and Abraham was really tested in this. The second category has to do with how far am I willing to go with God? And the first question under this is, am I willing to risk everything for him? Early in his life, Abraham set out into the unknown. God said, go to the place I will show you. He left all his comforts, he left all his familiarity, his job, his family, all that kind of stuff to follow God's plan, even when it was risky, even when he didn't know what it was. Later, he trusted that God would fulfill this promise that he made to him at 75 years old of a son, even when it didn't happen for a long time. Then the son was asked, Abraham was asked of God to give up the son. Would he give it up? Would he be willing to give up this promise? Are we willing to literally risk everything for God? If we do, we'll have a life that's way different than the norm. We'll have a life that's way different than most people. We'll have a life that's way different from what's typical Christianity. Abraham was willing to risk everything for God. Are we? Am I willing to give up anything for him? If God requires us to give up something, are we willing to give it up to him? No matter how much we like it, no matter how good it seems in our lives, are we willing to let it go if that's what God asks? If he asks us to give it up, will we do it? Will we do it for him? Abraham was willing to give up his son, just like God himself did through Jesus. How far are we willing to go? Are we currently at or heading towards being willing to give up anything and everything that God asks of us to place on the altar before him? Jim Elliot said, he is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And that's what we need to live our lives as. Third question in this category, am I willing to exchange good for great? Man, we're so often willing to settle, so often willing to exchange great and settle for good. There's a lot of really good people at the expense of settling for, or at the expense of not being great. There's a lot of great people in church, great people in youth ministry, great people in this church and this youth ministry that are willing to not go great because they're satisfied with good. We settle, spiritually and otherwise, for just getting by, for what's comfortable, for what's easy. We settle for fast food at the expense of banqueting and feasting with God. We settle for Spam when we could have prime rib. Abraham had a good life, but he was unwilling to settle for just good. Will we allow God to take us as we are, change us into who he desires, even if it's painful, even if it requires risk and sacrifice? Are we willing to exchange good for great? And then finally, do I have the guts to respond fully to God? Do I have the guts to do the right thing, no matter how hard it is, no matter what, no matter if it hurts, no matter if it's tough to do? Or am I only willing to go so far as it doesn't hurt me, it doesn't require anything of me, doesn't require me to give up anything? American Christianity leans so far towards comfortable and safe. When it comes down to it, do we have the guts to respond fully, to let go of whatever it is, to let go completely, to go all in, to push all our cards on the table, to have whatever he asks, whenever he asks, whatever it costs, in exchange for being totally committed to God? Abraham got everything he could have dreamed for and hoped for and longed for, and Isaac was now everything to him. This is the ultimate test, the ultimate call. His son had become his everything. Was he willing to lay that aside? Was he willing to even lay that down for the God who called him? Was God or the son the center of the world? The call for someone in those days to give up their firstborn would be like a surgeon giving up their hands, a pianist their fingers, or a visual artist the use of their eyes. He withheld nothing from God, and God said, I see now that you fear me, for you did not withhold even your only son. He's telling Abraham, now I know that you trust me, you love me more than anything in the world. Is that true of us? And if it's not, we're placing something ahead of God in our lives, and we're giving in to idols. Why don't we stop running to him? Stop running from him. Stop running away to other things, chasing after other things. It just makes us tired and weary and lost. And give ourselves completely to him. Go all in.